I still remember the way the salt air hit my face as Henry turned the old pickup into the gravel lot of the Anchor. It was late August, the kind of evening where the sun hangs low and golden over the Maine coast, painting everything in a glow that makes you feel alive. We'd been married 32 years, long enough to know every creak in the house, every quirk in each other, but this weekend was different. No kids calling about grandbabies, no leaky faucets to fix. Just me, Grace, in a sundress I hadn't worn since who knows when, and Henry in his faded flannel humming some tune from the 70s I couldn't quite place. It was our first real getaway in years, and I could feel the weight of routine slipping off my shoulders with every mile we put between us and home. The Anchor wasn't much to look at, peeling paint, a neon sign flickering over the door, but inside it buzzed with life. Fishermen laughed over beers. A jukebox crooned something twangy, and the smell of fried clams hung thick in the air. Henry grabbed us a booth by the window, the cracked leather creaking as we slid in. I ordered a gin and tonic, sharp and cold, while he nursed a whiskey, his fingers tapping the glass like he was waking up a part of himself he'd forgotten. We didn't say much at first, just watched the room, letting the noise wash over us. That's when I saw them. Ella was hard to miss. She leaned over the pool table, her wild curls spilling over her shoulders, lining up a shot with a grin that said she knew she'd win. She couldn't have been more than 35, all energy and mischief in a cut-off shirt that showed just enough to turn heads. Beside her, Lucas lounged against the wall, strumming an imaginary riff on a guitar that wasn't there, chatting up the bartender like they were old pals. He had that easy charm, late 30s maybe, with a scruffy jaw and a laugh that carried. They were younger than us, sure, but there was something about them that pulled my eyes and wouldn't let go. I caught Ella's gaze as she sank the 8-ball, smooth as silk. She straightened up, locked eyes with me across the room, and winked, bold as brass. I laughed before I could stop myself, the sound cutting through the hum of the tavern. Henry glanced over, raising an eyebrow. "What's so funny?" he asked, his voice gruff but curious. I swirled my drink, the ice clinking against the glass. "Those two," I said, nodding toward the pool table. "They're trouble." He grunted, sipping his whiskey, but I saw the way his eyes lingered on them, just for a second longer than usual. We might have left it there, two old-timers watching the young folks play, but then Lucas sauntered over, Ella trailing behind him like she owned the place. "Mind if we crash your night?" he asked, grinning wide. "You two look like you've got stories worth hearing." Before I could answer, Ella slid into the booth beside me, her knee brushing mine under the table. It wasn't an accident. I felt the heat of it, the deliberate little spark. Henry shifted beside me, his fingers tightening on his glass, but he didn't object when Lucas dropped into the seat across from us, offering to buy a round. "You're not from around here," Ella said, tilting her head at me, her voice low and playful. "What brings you to a place like this?" I smirked, leaning back. "Needed a break from the usual. You?" She shrugged, her fingers twisting a strand of hair. "Chasing the tide, I guess, seeing where it takes us." Lucas chuckled, passing me a fresh gin and tonic. "She means we're avoiding real life for a while." There was a glint in his eye, like he was daring us to ask more. The drinks kept coming, and so did the laughter. Ella teased Henry about his flannel. "You wear that to bed, too?" And he fired back something dry about her pool skills. Lucas leaned closer to me, his arm brushing mine as he told some wild story about a gig gone wrong. The air between us thickened, heavy with something I couldn't name yet. I glanced at Henry, testing the waters. "Should we let them hang around?" I murmured, low enough that only he'd hear. His hand brushed mine under the table, tense, but not pulling away. "Up to you," he said, his voice rough. I leaned into him, my lips close to his ear. This could be fun. His fingers flexed against mine, expectant, like he was waiting for me to decide. And maybe I already had. Outside, the ocean whispered against the shore, and I wondered just what kind of night we were stepping into. The next evening came quicker than I expected. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky over the Maine coast in streaks of orange and purple when Henry and I walked back into the anchor. I'd slipped Ella our plans the night before, scribbled on a napkin, casual as could be, like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I felt it in my bones as we stepped through the door, the tavern alive with the same clatter of glasses and low hum of voices. Henry's hand brushed mine as we moved through the crowd, his flannel sleeve catching the edge of my sundress. He didn't say it, but I could tell he'd been thinking about them all day. Ella and Lucas, the wild pair who'd crashed into our quiet little getaway. They were already there. Ella perched on a stool near the bar, her flowy top slipping off one shoulder, laughing at something the bartender said. Lucas was in the corner, strumming a real guitar this time, a beat-up acoustic he must have borrowed from someone. He caught my eye as I passed, flashing that lazy grin of his, and I felt a flicker of heat climb up my spine. I nudged Henry toward the bar, my voice light. "Let's get a drink." He nodded, but I saw the way his shoulders tensed, like he knew something was coming. Ella spotted us right away. She slid off her stool, sauntering over with that easy confidence, and stopped beside Henry. "Back for more, huh?" she said, her fingers grazing his arm as she waved for a beer. He shifted, clearing his throat, but didn't pull away. "Guess so," he muttered, his voice rougher than usual. I caught Lucas watching from across the room, his smile sharp, like he was in on some secret I hadn't figured out yet. He set the guitar down and ambled over, joining us as Ella ordered a round for the table. We ended up by the window again, the dark ocean stretching out beyond the glass, waves crashing in a steady rhythm. Ella didn't waste time. She leaned close, her elbow brushing mine, and fixed me with those sharp green eyes. "So, Grace," she started, her tone playful but probing, "what's the story with you two? Long marriage, quiet life?" I took a sip of my gin and tonic, letting the cool bite settle me. 32 years, I said. Steady, predictable maybe. Henry shifted beside me, his knee bumping mine under the table. A silent question in the way he moved. "Predictable's not so bad," Lucas chimed in, his voice smooth as he leaned back in his chair. His hand rested on the armrest, fingers brushing my shoulder, just enough to make me notice. "But I bet you've got some wild days buried in there somewhere." Ella smirked, her gaze flicking to Henry. "What about you? Ever miss the chaos?" He grunted, sipping his whiskey, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, the way he didn't quite meet her stare. "We manage," he said, low and guarded. Ella wasn't deterred. She leaned closer to him, her voice dropping. "You're quiet tonight," she teased, her fingers trailing over his sleeve, slow and deliberate. "Something on your mind?" He exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening, but he didn't pull back. I watched, my pulse kicking up a notch, and caught Lucas's eye across the table. He tilted his head, his hand sliding a little closer along the back of my chair. "You two seem open," he said, testing the waters, his voice low enough that it felt like it was just for me. I laughed, letting my hand rest on his wrist for a beat longer than necessary. "Maybe we are," I said, keeping my tone light but letting the words hang. Henry's breath hitched beside me. Just a small sound, but I knew him well enough to catch it. He was watching me now, his fingers curling slightly against his glass, and I could feel the air between us thickening, charged with something I hadn't felt in years. The night rolled on like that, Ella teasing Henry about his flannel again, her touch lingering as she leaned in to whisper something that made him chuckle, low and reluctant. Lucas kept his focus on me, his voice dropping as he asked, If you had one night to shake things up, what did you do? His fingers brushed my arm again, warm and steady, and I didn't answer. Just let the question settle, my heart thudding against my ribs. I could feel Henry's eyes on me, Ella's on him, the four of us tangled in this quiet little dance nobody was naming yet. It was me who broke the spell, broke. The tavern was loud, the crowd thinning as the night wore on, and I leaned toward Henry, my lips close to his ear. "Let's take this somewhere quieter," I murmured, my voice steady but heavy with intent. His eyes flicked to mine, searching for a second. Then he nodded, slow, deliberate. Ella caught the shift, her grin widening as she slid off her stool. "Thought you'd never ask," she said, her tone all mischief. Lucas grabbed his jacket, slinging it over his shoulder with that easy swagger, and tossed me a look that said he'd been waiting for this all along. We stepped out into the night, the cool air hitting my skin, the ocean roaring in the distance. Henry's hand brushed mine again as we walked toward the cottage we'd rented down the shore, tense, expectant, like he was holding his breath. Ella fell into step beside him, Lucas beside me, and I could feel the pull between us growing, tugging at something deep and unspoken. Whatever was coming, we were already in too deep to turn back. The cottage door clicked shut behind us, cutting off the hum of the ocean and locking us into a space that felt smaller than it should have. Lanterns flickered along the walls, casting a warm golden glow over the worn furniture. A couch, a couple of chairs, a rug that had seen better days. The air was thick with salt and heat, the kind of night that clings to your skin. I sank onto the couch beside Henry, my sundress sticking to my thighs, and watched him flex his fingers against his knee once before they went still. Across from us, Lucas sprawled into a chair, his arm draped over the backrest, his eyes steady on me. Relaxed, but sharp. Ella took her time, lowering herself beside Henry, her bare leg pressing against his jeans. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't an accident. Nobody spoke at first. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of what we'd walked into. Ella broke it, tilting her head toward Henry, her voice soft but teasing. "You're tense," she said, her fingers tracing the edge of his flannel sleeve, slow and deliberate. He exhaled through his nose, a rough sound, and I saw the way his jaw tightened, like he was caught between holding back and letting go. "Just taking it in," he muttered, his eyes flicking to me for a split second before settling on her. She smirked, setting her drink aside on the coffee table. "Good." Beside me, Lucas shifted, his hand drifting onto my thigh, light but firm enough to make my breath catch. "And you?" he murmured, leaning in just enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath against my ear. I tilted my head toward him, letting my hair brush his shoulder, and hummed. "Guess we'll see." His grip tightened slightly, a quiet promise in the way his fingers pressed into my skin. I didn't pull away. I leaned into it, feeling the heat climb up my spine, sharp and electric. Across from us, Ella moved closer to Henry. She leaned in, her lips brushing his jaw. Just a graze, but enough to make him freeze. His hands lifted, hovering for a moment before settling on her waist. Not pushing her away, just holding her there, like he was testing the feel of it. I watched his chest rise and fall faster now, and something twisted in my gut. Jealousy, maybe, or thrill. I couldn't tell. Lucas noticed, his voice dropping low. "You're not stopping her," he said, half a question, half a dare. I smirked, dragging my nails lightly along his hand. Neither's he. The air crackled, every move pulling us tighter into this web we'd spun. Ella's fingers slid down Henry's arm, her touch lingering as she whispered something too quiet for me to catch. His eyes widened, flicking to me again, and I saw the conflict there, raw, unguarded. "She says they've done this before," he muttered, his voice hoarse. Lucas chuckled, leaning back in his chair, his hand still warm on my thigh. "Keeps things interesting," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. My stomach flipped, stunned, thrilled, a little pissed off all at once. They'd played this game before, and we were the new pieces on the board. Henry's expression mirrored mine, his hands flexing against Ella's waist, like he didn't know whether to pull her closer or push her away. Then it hit its peak. Ella's hand slid lower, tracing lazy circles over Henry's thighs, her movements slow and deliberate. His breath turned ragged, his fingers digging into the couch cushions, knuckles white. "Relax," she murmured, her voice thick with amusement, and leaned in closer. His body tensed beneath her, every muscle coiling like a spring about to snap. Across from them, Lucas pulled me against him, his arm sliding around my waist, firm but gentle. My breath hitched as his fingers traced the curve of my hip, a slow, lingering pull that drew me into the heat of his chest. "Your turn," he whispered, his voice low and dark, vibrating against my skin. I didn't resist. My fingers curled against the couch, my body pressing into his as the space between us vanished. His breath grazed my neck, deep and measured, and I felt the urgency simmering beneath his restraint, a silent message woven into the way his touch lingered. The room pulsed with it, Ella's quiet, pleased sound, as she guided Henry deeper into her rhythm, his grip flexing at his sides, his control crumbling. My own pulse quickened, heat pooling low, the moment closing in around us like a vice. Then the twist hit. Henry's head tipped back, a sharp, unsteady sound slipping from his lips as Ella's fingers skimmed lower, keeping him exactly where she wanted. He exhaled, rough and urgent, and muttered, "You planned this, didn't you?" She laughed softly, not denying it. "Maybe," she said, her lips brushing his ear. "But you walked right into it." Lucas tightened his hold on me, his voice a rumble against my neck. "So did you, Grace." I froze, the realization sinking in. They'd seen us coming a mile away, two old-timers ripe for their game, and we'd let them. The moment teetered, sensation cresting in waves. Henry's trembling hands, Ella's knowing smirk, Lucas's steady pull anchoring me to the heat of it. My breath caught, sharp and shallow, as his fingers traced higher, just enough to send a shiver through me. Across from us, Henry's restraint shattered. He pulled Ella closer, his hands firm on her hips, surrendering to the pull. The air pulsed, charged and humming, every second threading us tighter into whatever this was. I couldn't tell whose gasp I heard, mine or Henry's, but it didn't matter. We were past the point of turning back, caught in the fire they'd lit. The heat in the cottage faded into something softer, heavier, as the night settled around us. I was still pressed against Lucas on the couch, his arm loose around my waist, his breath slowing to a steady rhythm against my neck. Across from us, Henry sat with Ella tucked beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, her wild curls spilling over his flannel. The lanterns flickered, casting long shadows across the room, and the ocean rolled outside, a low, steady murmur that filled the silence we'd fallen into. The four of us were breathless, tangled in the aftermath of whatever line we'd just crossed, and for a moment there was nothing but the sound of our uneven breathing stretching thin over what had unraveled. Ella stirred first, sitting up with a lazy stretch, that sly smirk tugging at her lips. "Not bad for a quiet town," she said, her voice light, but carrying a weight that lingered. Henry let out a rough laugh, rare for him, deep and unguarded, and rubbed a hand over his face like he was waking up from a dream. I caught his eye across the dim light, searching for something, regret maybe, or guilt, but what I found was different. Relief, I think, or maybe pride, like he'd surprised himself as much as he'd surprised me. "You okay?" I asked, my voice softer than I meant it to be. He nodded, slow and deliberate. You? I smiled, a little unsteady but alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Yeah, I said, and meant it. Lucas shifted beside me, his hand brushing mine as he pulled away to stretch, his fingers lingering just long enough to leave a warmth on my skin. You're full of surprises, Grace, he said, his tone easy but with a glint of something deeper behind it. I didn't answer, just let the words settle, my pulse still humming from the night. We didn't talk much after that. Ella stood smoothing her top, and Lucas followed, slinging his jacket over his shoulder with that same swagger he'd walked in with. See you around, Ella said, tossing us a wave as they headed for the door. Lucas glanced back at me, his grin sharp and knowing, and then they were gone, swallowed by the night, leaving the cottage quiet, except for the waves crashing in the distance. Henry and I sat there for a while, the weight of it all pressing down on us. I reached for his hand, threading my fingers through his, and he squeezed back. Not tight, just enough to say we were still us, even after this. Morning came too fast. The sun crept through the curtains, painting the room in pale light, and I got up to make coffee while Henry packed our bags. That's when I found it, tucked under a coaster on the coffee table, a rough pencil sketch on a scrap of paper. It was the four of us, laughing at the tavern that first night. Ella's wild curls, Lucas's grin, Henry's flannel, my sundress. She'd caught us mid-moment, raw and real, and left it behind like a keepsake. I held it up, my breath catching. Henry, look at this, I called. He came over, peering over my shoulder, and let out a low whistle. She's good, he said, and I could hear the wonder in his voice. We didn't say much more about it, just finished packing, loaded the truck, and hit the road back home. The sketch stayed with me, though, folded in my pocket, a quiet question I couldn't quite answer. Had we crossed a line or found something new? I kept turning it over in my head as the miles rolled by, Henry humming that same old tune beside me. Maybe it was both, a crack in the steady life we'd built, but also a spark we'd forgotten how to chase. I didn't know if we'd ever see Ella and Lucas again, or if we'd want to, but that night had shifted something in us, left a mark we couldn't erase. So here's the thing, most folks swear they'd never step into something like that. Not until it's right there in front of them, daring them to move. Be honest with me. If your partner suggested a night like this, would you say yes without blinking? Or is it a hard no? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm curious. And if you like this ride, hit that like button and subscribe. Stick around because there's more where this came from. See you in the next one.